correct? With all the, whatever board goes through a SEQR process for an application, it's the same set of questions and criteria, am I understanding that correctly?
There are like big picture questions that have to be answered in every SEQR review, but the specifics are going to be specific to a project and the particular impacts that are relevant to that
specific
project.
questions?
That's developed through the scoping process basically, and that's why this is so important, is you need to make sure that the question or the study or the impact that you want to examine is in the final scope. So we have a draft scope. If it's not there, make a comment so that it is there. And that is available on the town board website. We brought just a handful of copies today.
So yeah, I'm sorry, I did walk in late, so I might have missed this. But so the draft scope is the first step. And the first step for people making comments is to make sure that the draft scope has all the appropriate questions, right? So the first round of comments really should be about the questions that are on here, the issues. And then when it gets to SEQR, I assume, the way that my understanding is, and I want to make sure that I understand this correctly, then we'll have a list of questions, and they'll be accessible to us all. We'll be able to look them up, and then you can make comments. There's this first question, and that brings up this topic, and I want to make sure that the board recognizes, for instance, if there was a question about the greater good. I know this would not be a question, but just a hypothetical. The greater good, balancing the good of the many, of the good versus the good of the few, and wanting to make energy answer the energy needs. People might say, well, we've got to make sure that we have the right kind of energy. So within each question, people should be looking at the questions at that point.
Yep, so there's an opportunity now to look at the draft scope and talk about what are the questions that need to be answered, what are those issues. And that's going to form basically the table of contents for the draft environmental impact statement. When the draft environmental impact statement comes out, it'll be really big. It will have a lot of technical information. It will answer those questions, or attempt to, and make some conclusions about the level of impacts for various things or ways that those impacts can be mitigated. And then you'll have an opportunity to comment on that. So you can say, just totally hypothetical, your methodology in this study is flawed. You didn't consider, X, Y, and Z, or you said this, but you didn't look at the latest data on this. You're just, referring back to something that was from 20 years ago, and things like that. At that point, the comments can get really more substantive and in-depth. But now, if there's a particular question you want answered or area you want studied that is not already in that draft scope, now's the time to make that comment.
And what's the time frame for that? That is the 90 days.
It's 50 days right now, so it's due March 22nd, and we have those little quarter sheets of paper that give you that due date, and there's a scoping session on February 22nd. So that's your time frame. Go, scoping comments now.
Okay.
I kind of feel like you're trying to reinvent the wheel here. We've got a board who has a tremendous job ahead of them to review. We're all in this learning process to see where we're going. At what point can an assessment based on what this company's success has been in other places be made available to us so we have something to look at?
You can, and I haven't reviewed the draft scope in depth, but I'm assuming it's not currently in there. That's something you can bring up. I mean, you can't say, are the applicants like nice people or something, but as far as what their track record is in safety and their experience in doing this kind of project, that's a legitimate thing that can be part of the scope because it goes to the environmental impacts, the public health and safety impacts. You can ask that the board require that be part of the environmental impact statement.
Would that necessarily have to come from the company itself, or could it come from the area in which the site is, in which the project is sited?
Well,
it's going to have to come from the company because this is their scoping document. They're going to have to answer those questions.
They haven't done a project like this before.
I mean, they don't have to.
Well, then they'll have to say that.
They did say that.
No, I know, but I'm saying in the environmental impact statement, they would have to say that, and they'll have to explain, what their track record is. And now, if the board gets a draft environmental impact statement that, let's say, answers that question in a very cursory way, doesn't have a lot of information, then the town board can say, well, we're not accepting this. You just said, yes, we have a good safety record and didn't expand, you really need to provide details, and they would have to provide those details. And those details are what they are, and they're gonna come from the applicant, but if at the end of the day, the board doesn't feel that the applicant can operate the project safely, well, then that's a reason not to approve the project.
Haley, what is the public to expect at the scoping meeting on the 22nd?
Thank you.
I think that's a question for the town board. There are different ways that these meetings can be set up, whether it's to take a lot of public comment, whether there'll be a presentation by the applicant, I'm not sure.
What was the question? I didn't hear.
I'm sorry, the question was, what can the public expect at the scoping meeting on February 22nd? How's that gonna be set
It's
up?
gonna be more or less run like this. We're gonna sit there, and you guys are gonna, the glide path will be there.
Okay,
And like I said, let them talk, have your questions ready. And they gave out their email address at their last meeting, that if you guys want to jump ahead, I don't have their email, but I'm sure Susie Reevy will have that, the clerk. You can email them and ask your question now.
They do return calls.
They do, yes.
I mean, they're good about that.
However, Rocky, a very important point right now. If you have a question, and don't wait till the 22nd, put it in writing, send it to them with an email, and have it in writing at the scoping session, because they're not gonna answer you at that session. But in order to have your question in the public record, what's your last plan to, or what color you're gonna paint it? Put it in writing, sign it, and submit it to their company in an email, so you have a record of it, because in the very end of this process, every question that is asked by the public has got to be answered in their final document. And if they don't do that, that leaves you grounds for your Article 78. But any question that you have, whether you're gonna have birdhouses up on that, or what color you're painting it, put it on a piece of paper and get it to them, and it'll be in the public record.
I just have one clarification to that, and it's a very important point, that you've gotta write it down and
Yes.
send it in to be part of the public record, but don't send it to the applicant. I mean, you can, and they have, in my experience, been good about answering, and that's fine, but to get it on the public record, you've gotta send
Send it
it
in writing.
to the board
Okay. so
in one of the
that's
public
what-
comment periods, for it to be.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, if you do it in an open air agenda, you get up and you have a very valid question, it's not submitted in writing, they do not have to answer it. It behooves anybody that wants to get questions answered to put it in writing and get it to the people.
But we just did that.
Well,
No.
So, just to reframe my question, because I'm not satisfied with the answer. So, what is it that a scoping meeting typically is supposed to provide that's different? So now we're submitting comments to the town board, and until March the 22nd. So we expect all of those questions to be compiled and responded to. So what happens? What's the scoping meeting typically supposed to provide the public?
Well, it's not, go ahead.
basically what's gonna happen is we're gonna have a meeting, and everybody's gonna come in, and there's gonna be a list of signees like we did tonight, and there's maybe gonna be a second list of people who would like to speak. And Vinnie's right, it's always nice to put your comments in writing and your questions in writing. The way we plan on running this meeting is that each person that speaks will have up to 3 minutes to express what they'd like to say. So make sure you have your comments concise in what you want to ask. We're going to have a stenographer there who's going to record all the questions and everything. So there's going to be a complete public record of what happened this scoping. So any questions that anybody asked verbally at this meeting will become, in effect, a written comment, a written question that they'll have to address. And the town board is going to be looking at this. And so it's a little bit less important that you send in your comments in writing initially or first, because they will be as part of a stenographer's record at this meeting.
What if you have 6 comments or questions? You can do 3 minutes, 3 minutes. I mean, I'm not trying to be funny.
You can also, you don't have to stand up and talk for 15 minutes. If you have something that's in your dissertation that's long that you want to say, write everything down in a letter and submit it, and you don't have to say anything.
So if there's going to be several of us, obviously I think we're all going to have the same concerns, we're all going to have the same questions. Can we just compile it all and have a representative then?
Well,
Absolutely. You
We
most
don't
certainly
need to
can.
have 10, 5, 15, 25 people up there. That's not gonna be the impact. The impact is gonna be that these questions are being presented
And-
to be answered. It
And it's
doesn't
not gonna
necessarily
hurt
have to be.
if 10 individuals ask the same 10 questions. The most important part of what John is trying to make, you don't have to get up and do, you can have your 10 questions and get them to them in writing, and they'll have to be answered. So you don't have to, I don't even wanna go to that meeting, because it's kind of like, I'm gonna put my 50 questions in, and when I read the next document, they better be answered in there. And that's what you have to look at. Don't trust the stenographer, don't trust the town, I'm only speaking for past history. Put your questions in, write them, document them, and get them to the town, because they have a way of disappearing.
All right, thank
Well,
you.
also, there were questions put into writing. Over a month ago, I had written to Peter Root, and I asked him 30 or 40 questions.
Yep.
And then before the meeting, was maybe 5 or 6 days before the meeting, I asked if he would have the answers to my questions ready, so that would shortcut. In other words, he could just address the questions, and then if people had more questions, that would be fine. He called me back and he said, no, that's impossible, I can't do it, and I've had the staff working on it, but we'll have all the questions in time for the meeting. That didn't answer, that didn't happen. So we resubmitted questions to the applicant at the meeting, and then there was probably 30 or 40 questions on 2 pieces of paper, and then there were probably another 40 or 50 more that were given to representatives of Glide Path. And they said, we will put these up on the website. As of yesterday, they weren't there.
So, and this is an important clarification, and if you want to ask questions to the applicant and they may or may not answer them, I mean, that can be helpful. It can be a good way to get information, but if you want your questions or comments part of the public record and for the applicant and the board to be accountable for either responding to them or saying, this is irrelevant because, you've got to submit them as part of the formal scoping comment process.
So the reason I'm saying that is because we have to ask them again, and we should.
I have a copy if you want to
Yeah.
give it to them here.
Just going back, what's happened in the past with your questions directly to them, in the last meeting we had here, that was an informal meeting where they have no obligation. Going forward in the process changes, it becomes more formal, and there's an obligation on everybody's part to answer questions that are asked of them formally in a writing, and those kind of concerns will change.
Yeah,
In the past, they were informal, and
Well, I don't know if they were informal. They were very formal when they were
I'm
asked.
talking that part of the process was informal.
And I think it impinges upon credibility not to have answered them after promising it publicly.
Okay,
Jeffrey, did you have some?
point taken.
I
It
understand the legal
definitely does,
aspect.
yeah.
I understand the legal aspect of what you're talking about.
There's your question.
Yeah, I know. Thanks.
Just based on the back and forth, I'd just like to offer some advice to the community, and I like John's answer about how the meeting is going to be conducted. So I'd like to just take about 2 minutes and give you a little bit of review and then some advice, because I've been to a lot of scoping meetings. The purpose is the scoping process. The purpose of the scoping process is to get on the record a list of things that need to be addressed in the environmental impact statement. It can be through writing, or it can be in a public scoping meeting that the town is going to hold on the 22nd of February. That is a public forum for people to come in, and there'll be a sign-up sheet. Usually people will come in, and you'll have 3 minutes, as John indicated, to list the things that you want to see studied in the environmental impact statement. So I would, and it's usually not, I can't speak for what the town here will do, it's usually not intended as a question and answer period, or a back and forth, or a debating period. So it's best not to say, I want to know what this is going to do to my property value, and sit there and wait for an answer, because usually you're not going to get an answer. You can say, I would like the environmental impact statement to address how property values be impacted in whatever neighborhood you live in. So I wouldn't waste time by trying to expect question and answer, and I wouldn't waste time by spending a lot of your 3 minutes explaining why you don't like the project, or saying that you are against the project. Can't tell you not to do it, but it's not really an efficient use of your time in the scoping process or in that public scoping meeting.
Because that way you don't get your questions answered.
You don't get your questions in.
Yeah.
Questions will be answered in the environmental
You
impact
won't get your
They
questions
shouldn't be
answered.
answered that night.
The answers are in the file, or in the draft.
Right, it
There's-
is.
That's good advice.
Just as a point, if there is a simple answer, if there is a simple answer to a question, they may answer it at the meeting, they may not.
That's right.
And the town board has also decided that if at this first scoping session, which is going to be in the town hall next door on the 22nd, if there isn't sufficient time to complete, or more people would like to talk and we don't have the time or space, enough room in the room, we're going to have an additional scoping session after that, a second meeting. So it doesn't necessarily end with that
That's
one
highly
meeting.
commendable. Yes, that's very good practice. Thank you.
What would be even better practice if you just took the scoping period right now and gave it 60 days. Because if let's say all the questions don't get on the record that night, you have to schedule another one, we're all running out of time. We're running against the time clock right now, John. So that's what makes people even more apprehensive about this thing. So maybe next week decree a 60-day scope. Well, I'm mad you guys are asking for 90. 60, another 30 days would help everybody relax a little bit more because they're really nervous about not getting their points across.
Well, that's something that we can talk about when Jim comes back.
Okay, well,
I
that's
mean,
good.
Joel's not here because of the weather, we understand that. But then when we get the board together, we can talk about the 90 days, 60 days. All right?
These will all be taken into consideration. You know,
Yeah, that's good.
One of the things
Brenda,
that-
did you, one second, Breno had his hand up.
I have a question regarding the process as it applies to permits. One of the permits, Jeff, that you mentioned is the emissions standards. I'm not exactly sure whether it's an EPA standard or DEC standard. What's really frightening is the comment was made about the tons of emissions that will be dispersed. I think that as far as the exhaust stack is concerned, the issue of height, I think that that's a function of the area of dispersion.
Yes.
The taller the smokestack, the larger the dispersion, and the lower the smokestack, the more localized the emissions will be. And it's frightening to me that we're talking about emissions in terms of tonnage, tons of emissions. So even though this thing may pass the permit level, that is going to be much higher than the standard that we have today, which is nothing. So the question that I would have is, can the DEP or EPA standard be challenged in terms of the allowable amount of emissions that would be dispersed in this area? We understand that there's technology that can minimize the amount of emissions in terms of controlled precipitators or scrubbers. Is that something that could be requested in the process? We don't want emissions. This is what we want you to do. Include in your design aspect scrubbers and precipitators. Is that unreasonable?
No, not at all, and it is a DEC standard, although the program is overseen by EPA, but DEC has the authority to implement the Clean Air Act in New York State, and there are specific standards that need to be met, and they're DEC standards, and they're based on the current level of air pollution in the area, which fortunately or unfortunately is low here. So that means that the standards are lower because we have relatively clean air. But there are things that need to be put in place, and there are calculations that need to be made, and both in the context of SEQR and in the context of the DEC permitting process. And there will eventually be a draft permit issued by DEC, and there will be an opportunity for the public to comment on that. You can push for much more stringent air pollution control.
So
Because as you know, this is a game, because they can buy emission standard or credits, I think, from one area to
That's for
another.
carbon, yeah, they can't do that for like NOx
different.
and, yeah, it's different.
They're not VOCs here, this is carbon, it's two different emissions.
But, you know, it's a very valid point, and you can certainly bring up concerns about the level of air emissions, and if you have particular ideas about the kinds of technologies that should be employed or the way that emissions should be calculated, then you can certainly submit those as part of the scoping process.
One question that I have is because they don't know how often it's going to be run on gas and how often it's going to be run on oil, how do they really know what the
There's two different emissions, there's two different emission standards.
Can you ask that the emissions be within the norm of your locality?
There's a specific, so there are standards or limits that DEC has, and I mean, I guess the short answer to your question is you can't really challenge those limits. I mean, you could when they made them, but unless they reopen them, you know, right now is not the time to challenge them. But you can say that we can do better here, or these are the reasons that we should do better, and these are the types of technologies that we should implement. And the calculation part is really important, which is how are they looking at the interaction between the two fuels, and how are they, you know, the plant may run 6 hours a day, it may run 2 hours a day, it may run 24 hours a day, and DEC is supposed to look at the maximum potential to emit air pollutants. So that's really important that they look at that maximum level. If the plant was running 24/7, 365 days a year, this is what the emissions would be. And that's what you have to base the air pollution controls off of, not, you know, if it was 2 hours a day or 3 days a week or something.
That's a good point.
Maybe I just want to ask Haley, I believe that, so there are DEC emissions standards requirements. Can the lead agency, because this is close to residential areas, require that they exceed the DECs as mitigation, because it's near a residential area?
DEC, the state would preempt the local controls on something like that, on air pollution, yeah. It's actually EPA that has to approve the air permits eventually. And if you town can try to do it.
There's no impact if there's a school?
Children,
Oh, that's worth bringing up. I mean, is that part of the calculation? No, but is it worth bringing up as part of the SEQR considerations? As they're looking at, is the appropriate site, what are the mitigations that need to come into play? It's totally appropriate to make sure that's taken into consideration. It doesn't change the standard, but. Do you have a question?
Can they be forced to consider alternative sites?
Yeah.
Or tell us what else they've considered?
They said they did consider for 2 years in the Hudson Valley. The reason they chose behind us, because I asked that question, why'd you pick right behind us, 700 feet behind our townhouses? And they said, we've been looking for 2 years in the Hudson Valley, and the reason they chose that site was because Central Hudson already has the gas, the natural gas underneath, you know, right there. Well, go find someplace else.
I mean, they can, you know, and that's why the alternatives analysis is so important. It's got to be reasonable alternatives. So, you know, you have to look at what is the applicant looking to do, kind of what's the goal of their project, what kind of project is it. But the town board could say, you've got to look at X, Y, and Z site that all seem to meet all of your criteria, and for these reasons, we think would have fewer environmental impacts. And then the applicant would have to go study them and say, you know, either this is a feasible alternative, or we studied it and it turns out it isn't feasible for these reasons. But
Not
the
for sale.
alternatives, or not for sale. I mean, that is, you know, a consideration. But that's a really important part of SEQR.
And condemnation would not be a consideration.
Thank you. Yeah.
Is it my understanding that they will not purchase this property until approvals have been met?
Well, that would be a good business practice. I wouldn't, if I was gonna build a building, I wouldn't buy it until I got my approvals. That's just a standard practice. That's
It's
all.
under contract.
They have an option on it, yeah.
All the properties under contract.
And I can't speak to this as fact, but we've been told by them and, you know, our folks that were involved, that they have looked at multiple sites in the town, and this is the only one that they found that meets what they need in order to accomplish what their goals are.
Well, financially.
Well, this is a business decision.
Yes. And that, so financially is the cheapest way to go.
It's a business decision, exactly.
It's a good business decision.
I'm saying
You can't expect them to make a bad business decision.
But people need to understand that it is a business decision, so it's gonna cost them the less money to use our site, this site.
I just want to throw in that on the 13th of this week, next week, that Citizens for Local Power are going to be addressing battery storage, climate, and the grid. They're breaking down a lot of things, but one of the things they're breaking down are these credits that are really important to understand as to why a glide path, as I understand it, why a glide path project, gas and renewables, is the way that they're choosing to go, why they couldn't, or why they're, as I understand it, is why they're not able economically to do just a renewable project. And I think it'll be really enlightening for us to understand how these credits work and what people are doing in our area to make renewable projects economically viable for companies to come in. So this will be happening on the 13th
That's a
of next
Tuesday,
week.
right?
It's next Tuesday at the Rosendale Rec. Citizens for Local Power are hosting it, and it's a robust panel. So who will be able to answer some of those questions? Robust. Tanya?
So and I haven't read through this, but I see in here in the draft scope, there's alternatives. And we talk about two alternatives. There's this alternative site where you could do it somewhere else, and the alternative generation of the energy that you're trying to make. As it is now, how are they asking that here? And is there a different way that it should be being asked?
Yeah, it's a very vague, very vague ask. They say,
and this was and who came up with these? Who came up with these?
usually the applicant, yeah.
The applicant comes up with the.
Yeah, the town board usually has a back and forth with them, usually throughout the process, but it's usually the applicant that has.
So the three alternatives that they're looking at is the no-build alternative. What if we don't do anything? Which is always part of an environmental impact statement. So don't even think, I'm not going to be mean anything.
Thank you guys so much for coming.
Yeah,
Really
thank
appreciate
you.
Just one last thing, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and I hope we answered some of your questions, and, it's a very difficult process, and we're here to listen to you and hear the whole process and make the best decision for everybody at the end of the day. Once again, thank you very much.
Two questions quick before you go, John.
Okay.
One question, how come the town board is doing all this stuff when we have a planning board that this scope document never got to see? The planner never got to see the scoping document because you guys accepted it with no comments from your planning board. This is a big matter that should be addressed, and why did the planning board not get the scoping document according to the secretary? And second of all, my biggest problem is we're moving so fast forward on this with scoping, we do not even have a good set of documents on this plan. Everything is what do they call it on the plan there? It's a proposal. There's not a concrete document that says the building is going to be this tall, the stack is going to be this tall, this is going to happen. How can we even formulate questions on a proposed piece of paper when the planning board should be asking the applicant to take and give us a frozen document, this is what we're going to build. And the last thing is, up until today, the first part of the EAF was never posted on our website. We didn't even see that. We couldn't even comment on that. I went to the planning board and said, where is it? Well, we didn't post it yet. So they did a good job. They posted it yesterday. But all these questions are making us furious out here because it seems like everything's getting covered up. And you should address this with your board.
I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have the answers to any of those questions. But I will look into it. I spoke to Mr. Mulligan today. He's on his way back from out west. He was on a military retreat from...
But he's being paid to be our planning board chairman, and he didn't review this. Our planner, we're paying Sorensen to...
I did not ask him that question when I spoke to him today,
but how can you guys...
I will ask him that question tomorrow.
How can a town board accept this without any input from the planning board? That's my question to you. You guys rubber stamped this with not even talking to Sorensen. Your secretary didn't even have a copy of this till yesterday. So how do you expect us to believe that all this is going to happen, John? I'm a bit upset about it.
Could that be answered at the town board meeting and maybe...
I would address The board was not involved in any of what you're asking about right now.
They
in fact,
accepted
this
a
is-
document. They put their name on a document and set a time period for it. That means they had to review this document to say this is acceptable for the folks of the town of Ulster. So I'm
You
not,
haven't approved anything.
what's it say here? You approve this?
It's a draft.
Well, it's a draft, but still, it's approved.
A draft is not a final document, it's a different thing. It's simply a draft, which is subject to change with information, okay? All we've done is approve the draft, which basically starts the process. That's it. That's all that draft means. And by having a positive declaration, we're looking to look at everything to do with this project to make sure that it is safe. If it's not safe, then we're gonna say no.
Well, then the next step is you tell Glide Path to get us not a preliminary set of drawings for this building, a positive set of drawings. Because we're doing all their homework by making every excuse that they can cover up in their next proposal, they're gonna do it.
Some of what you're talking about with the plan is like the height, for example, of the chimney. They started out with 100 feet. It's reduced now, it's gonna be somewhere between 60 and 80 feet. We don't know, because they're waiting for the approvals from DEC to say whether or not 60 is gonna be okay or 80 is gonna be okay, because the tree heights in that area is an average of 70 feet.
And it'll be based on the most possible?
Well, DEC will tell them, you know,
DEC is gonna tell them.
it's possible or impossible to meet DEC standards with a 60-foot stack. I assume
Well, I
the
think
guidelines
that
are
question
make it
should
as
have been
low as
answered
they
before the
can
proposal was
to
put out
meet
there.
the air emission
Well,
standards.
DEC hasn't
Lower
given them the answer.
Well, then wait, then this is all premature because we're all just guessing at things. You're making us upset about things that may not even happen. You know, so it's all premature, John, and that's all I'm saying.
In the 60 days?
Well, that's the thing, is we didn't agree on the 90 days, 30 days, or 60 days. Right, so we got to agree on that first. We can get all this settled in between there.
But the clock for the scoping period is ticking right now, correct?
Yes.
The town hasn't agreed on 50 days?
We haven't agreed on anything, it's usually 30 days.
Well, right now it's 50 days according to what's on the
50?
website, but it sounds like you guys are still considering whether that's the
Yeah,
appropriate.
well, we'll sit down and talk, because Jim's out of town right now, he's on vacation.
And I don't think the clock's gonna start until the first scoping session at the 22nd is gonna open that
No,
period.
it started
whatever
now,
it is.
John, under DEC rules, it started now, with the
It starts from
acceptance.
the draft
With the
scope.
acceptance of this draft scope, the clock is started right now. It's ticking.
So that's why asking for that, which we have, I asked for it at the last board meeting, that 90-day period would really be helpful, because we're ticking, but we're not gonna get a smokestack answer until the trees are green. That's months from now. So,
Do you know, I've walked the whole ridge, and actually, where they're planning on putting this is right behind the beaver pond, and there are no trees in that particular area, unless they've grown up all of a sudden.
Behind our house, right in their backyard.
Who decided
This is-
if it
I'm
was
looking
to
at
go
the
to
picture
the town
now.
board or the planning board to make that decision?
Looking at the
What?
That's how
Who
close
would be the reviewing body of the seeker?
lead agency.
The lead agency. Who decided who was the lead agency?
Well, the town board does. If anytime a facility is built in the town, it's over a certain square footage, then the town
One second,
board
everybody.
decides whether or not they want to be the lead agency or the planning board. By having the town board as the lead agency as opposed to the planning board, you have elected officials that answer directly to the people making the decisions. So it gives the people a little more strength and power to
John,
influence a decision. Yeah.
did the glide path or Chazen go to the planning board first to show the project, and the planning board passed it along to the town board? Is that for
Well, I think-
consideration?
I think they probably came to the supervisor first and said, this is what we want to do, this is the size of the project. And the supervisor made a decision, which I think is a wise decision for the town board to be the lead agency, because we have a better ability to listen to the public than the planning board.
Yeah, but I disagree with that, John, because you guys, in all due respect, Mr. Quigley is a brilliant businessman, but he knows nothing about the environment. and neither does the town board. Where the planning board and a paid planner, which you guys are paying a planner, could review this and make a recommendation to you guys to still be lead agency, but at least you would have a buffer to get some of these questions worked out before they got here.
Vinny, I don't disagree with anything you just said. The planner and certain people on the planning board know more than I know personally. And Mr. Quigley is a brilliant person, yes, absolutely. But those people that you just spoke of, Alan Sorensen and the planning board, will not part of this process. They'll be an intricate part of our process and brought in and
Well, so far they haven't, John.
with us and
Yeah, I can understand that. I like that, but so far, Mr. Sorensen is completely in the dark, and Mr. Sorensen is not aware of what's going on.
Well, I'd like to bring this back around to scoping, and I'd like to thank you for coming tonight and being with us. It means a lot, so thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank all of you for these wonderful questions, especially to your town board members, because it's so important for the citizens of the town of Ulster to be forthright with their elected officials, so it's great. And let's take another question.
February 15th is also the Ulster County Legislature meeting. I'm wondering if that power meeting is going to be videotaped.
Yes.
Wonderful. And is it possible to ask you to arrange a walking tour tonight so we can all have a date when we can walk this path?
Nora will be. Why don't you speak to Nora when the meeting is complete? Nora is an expert, and by the way, Nora has pictures and a presentation of the ridge.
There are just 6 storyboards which are taking from KE10 to, well, actually I took it up to KE3 because any water that flows off of the ridge will go north and go up through and go into a good.
Yeah, and I would say to schedule a tour is a great idea, but also to do some breakout groups together. If you have friends in the room that you'd like to get together, right, to work on questions together, you can do that. And while we have Haley and Jeffrey here, do we have any, because we have about 15 minutes left, 20 minutes left, great. Any other questions that you have about scoping and about what's upcoming that they can help you with? Yep, Vince?
Just one thing to all the folks here, thanks again for coming out, because this is a very important process, and our town does not take it very seriously. Jeffrey and Haley, thank you guys for coming. Thanks for lending us a hand. I can't express enough, and you guys can correct me on this scoping session that's coming up at the town board, which all you guys are going to be there, please have your questions in writing so you can submit them. From past experience working with this town, things disappear, and then they're going to have a stenographer there. Who knows if they're going to have that if John's just talking. But please don't expect an answer that night, because there's going to be some difficult questions and they're not going to be able to answer them. They're just going to say to you they will be answered in the next part of the thing. So please write those questions, and I don't care if there's 100 of them, write them down and give them to them, because when the next document comes out and your question hasn't been answered, that's when we can really start tearing them up.
Haley, Jeffrey, how does that work when the public submits their question to the town board or to Supervisor Quigley? What should we be looking for to make sure that our comments are documented somewhere typically? It sounds like every town does it, or every process.
They would be in the finding statement, right, Jeff? They have to be answered in the finding statement.
Not in the finding statement.
For the draft scope, you'd just be looking at the final scope.
Yeah, the final scope should catch all the comments that you have.
There was some talk about sending to the clerk.
There was a little bit of confusion there.
The address that was on the draft scope was to the supervisor, so I would send them there, but he is right that if you send them to the clerk, he's going to send them to the supervisor. You send them to the supervisor, he's going to send it to the clerk and make sure that it gets distributed to everyone, but I would send it to the address that is on the draft scope, yeah. Yeah, or you can copy both, but either way, I think.
Send them to both. Why not?
I want to reiterate something I said at the very beginning, that in making comments on the draft scope, to be sure to look at Part 1 and Part 2 of the EAF, because those documents inform it, and you'll find contradictions in all three, and to point out the contradictions that exist, because Part 1, I think, is the most informative document. It's not the latest, but it's the most informative document. Part 2 explains the impact, this is from my reading, the impacts of Part 1, how this will impact. They don't always blend, and sometimes the scope ignores certain parts. And the last thing I want to say is, there's certain things that this gentleman brought up, like the size of the stack. Those are probably DEC approved. But if DEC says it could be 60 to 100 feet, be careful what you ask for, because if taller means greater dispersion and shorter means greater proximate pollution, this is what you're asking for. So you have to figure it out. It's not just visual, it has to do with air quality as well. So thank you very much.
Some of our questions, the town supervisors, town clerk, whatever, do they have to respond or acknowledge that they received this if you do review the email, or is it just something like you said will be in the...
No, you'll just find it in the final scope itself, but they have an obligation to maintain a record of that, and, anyone might be able to point to a circumstance where something got lost, but they have a legal obligation to retain that, and it will be part of the record of this proceeding, but you won't get like a personal acknowledgement.
Oh, no, just the general response to that. Okay, thank you.
Do we have do we have a list of things to consider? Good resources to reference when you're thinking about what to be looking at?
So we don't right now, but what I think we'll be able to provide, working with Kingston Citizens and some other groups in the next couple of weeks, will be sort of a template letter, just 1 or 2 pages, so not super in-depth, but pointing out a few of the key areas and that should be studied, that folks can use if they want to help direct their scoping comments.
I'd like to make a suggestion. I got a copy of the full environmental assessment form, Part 1, about a month and a half ago. This is the most telling document that I have received. There are pictures of everything. There are questions which were answered, and I went through and I marked some of the questions they answered incorrectly. According to this, is a 1,500-foot buffer zone. There is no buffer zone because the backs of our property are right on that. That buffer zone, which is not 1,500 feet, also includes Ulster Garden Apartments, along with everyone in Sunset Gardens and everyone who lives on Risley Ledge or Quail. So it says there is a buffer zone, there is none. And an interesting question is, what is a buffer zone for? What is the purpose of buffer zones? To provide a neutral area between two factions which somehow don't agree. Also says there are no daycare centers or homes for special people for special needs. We do have those. In here it says no. So
you have to remember also that the applicant probably did not do this. Chasen did this.
Right.
And this happens all the time. That's why this first part of that document that you're talking about should be gone over and point out at this scope of all the mistakes that are on here, because they blatantly lie on these things.
Well, I think it's just a great starting point. If everyone has one of these and they can go through, look at the answers, but it's a great place to find your questions also.
Right.
Well, this says this. Well, it's going to bother, bats don't bother anybody. Well, yeah, there are hundreds of bats in my neighborhood. They keep us from being eaten alive by mosquitoes.
The other thing is you only have the second part of
This is the first one.
Oh, that's the first, that's part 1. That's what's missing.
That's what we
That's what's missing.
Oh, okay, that went up today, yesterday.
Hold on.
It's not really an insight, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that they could get that form, both parts, on the town website. I believe if you go to the town website and it's under proposed projects, they have the EAF, they have the draft scope on there, so all the documents that you need should be on there.
It's very helpful. And we asked the town to run it off for us and come and can you pick up
25 cents a page.
Yeah.
Might be able to get it.
It does cost a lot of money to run stuff.
You're better off printing it yourself, I think.
No, they actually put it, I made it put it up on the website yesterday, so we downloaded it from the website. Laura had done that for me, because I wasn't paying 25 cents a page.
So
But
do
it
we-
wasn't on the town's website
You
until
didn't ask me
yesterday.
what I was gonna charge you, though.
We'll work out a deal, how's that? We'll take it out and trade, Tootsie, no problem. There you go.
Oh, no, all right, so do we have any downloading
You
thoughts?
can download it now.
Hey Vince, everyone?
No, just thanks again, everyone, for coming out. I know there's a lot of interest and a lot of concern about this project, as there should be, but, you know, I can't emphasize enough the importance to stay engaged throughout the process. Submit your comments to the town board, stay engaged. You know, we and certainly Rebecca will keep you guys informed every step of the way. When there's a new comment period, when DEC issues their draft permit, when you've got an opportunity to weigh in at all of those times, because it's very, very important to get your input in.
And I would just add, based on what I heard from the two town board members, I would keep pressing for that longer comment period,
Yeah,
because
they seem
it
open.
sounded like there's some wiggle room there.
So
They're open to it.
So speaking of that, if anybody hasn't signed this petition asking just that, did it make it around to everyone?
Now, this is for people who haven't signed
Online.
Yeah.
Right.
But you know what, even if you've signed online, I think it's more valuable if you live in the town of Ulster to make sure that you sign this petition, because we can scrub it. We can scrub the names when the petition is complete. So if you're from the town of Ulster, which the majority of people here tonight are, please sign
And
this petition.
this petition has to be residents of the town of Ulster. I mean, other people are concerned neighboring the city, but however, to carry the weight in the town, you have to be a town of Ulster residents to be petitioning our town board to give us the 90 days.
So we have two petitions.
Can I say one?
We have two petitions. We have one online that's been put out to everybody, and there's one now going around that's specifically for the town of Ulster residents.
And if anybody here would want to get some signatures this weekend, contact me, because I have them, I printed out, and I'll be happy to get it to you, or just send you the document that you're seeing here. The more signatures we can present before the board meeting on Thursday, the stronger our position will be.
Right, and I just want a few last
Even if you get 5 on there, every signature will count.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rebecca.
No, it's
Sorry.
fine. Just a few closing comments. One is that we're filming tonight, so we have everything captured, the questions and the dialogue. Thanks to Clark and the Kingston News for being here. So on Kingston Citizens, we'll make the video available with the PowerPoint for you to be able to listen and watch along. I just want to reiterate, on everybody's table is the next public educational forum for you to attend if you're free, for citizens and for municipal leaders. And if you have any questions, I can try to answer them for you tonight. I also want to say that one of the opportunities the town of Ulster citizens has right now is that the next town board meeting is the 15th of February. It's next Thursday. What's today? Friday. So it's in six days, and that is the night that you can really press for the 90-day public comment, or however much time you feel you need. I think you made a great case tonight where your petition can be presented and where you can respectfully just request more time. It seems like there's room for that. So that's very good news for everybody, and I encourage you to go to the meeting next Thursday and make that request. And finally, I'd like to thank Haley and Jeffrey for taking the time to be here with us so quickly. They're right out in front of the town board meeting, the scoping period, and they're terrific partners, and they've been advocating for the public from the beginning on this proposal. It came right to the public's aid, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca, because the work that you do to give the community a voice is really invaluable. This is our job.
So, a quick comment before everybody leaves. How many people have email addresses here?
Because it's very, very important that we have your email addresses so that we can contact you by email when lots of important things are happening. So if you can go on, right now, we're setting up, Laura?
Laura has the list.
Laura, do you have?
I have the list right here.
Free mail.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but you know what?
Email?
There's no email.
No.
So if anybody wants to add an email,
Yeah, we need
Please
to
do.
have an email so that we can email you.
And everybody, Nora has her